thanks to all the people who got us here together so we can have so much fun. More thanks to my colleagues Mari Pressman and Dr. John Veltheim. Dr. Veltheim has a consciousness-based therapy called Body Talk, and he is able to cure stage 4 cancer over the telephone. And next week in Malta, he will be teaching his methods to his students, and I will be sitting next to him for 3 days talking about quantum physics. And the reason this is exciting is not only because it's an application of quantum physics to healing, but I think we're going to find out some things about quantum physics itself. So quantum coherence in water, what is it? Why is it important? What's its significance for health? Significance for morphogenesis? Significance for consciousness? And I will just begin by saying that I think Dr. Sheldrake is correct. I think his morphic field is the best model to explain the origin of morphology and the origin of consciousness. And in this is a simple model. This is an amino acid, but it could be a cell, a tissue, an organ, or you. And the basic idea that I'm going to tell you about is that the coherent spinning of water molecules at the surfaces of any biological object are essential to the communication between the object and the morphic field and in the other direction. So water is essentially a two-way connecting link to this very important field. My beginning was with the living matrix in the 1980s. I recognized that histology and cell biology had revealed that there is a continuous system that extends throughout the organism. Key was the discovery by Mark Brecher in Cambridge, England, of integrins that connect the cytoskeleton with the cell's environment. And this is a continuous system. I call it the living matrix. It goes everywhere in the body. And Dr. St. Georgi, who was working, actually, I was working across the hall from him at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, he brought this whole system to life when he pointed out that proteins are semiconductors. That's something you probably haven't heard much about. That's an idea that never percolated into the scientific community. I finally, after many years, figured out what happened. What happened was that one of his closest colleagues and someone who should have known better did a study which proved that proteins are not semiconductors. He was a biochemist, and he did what biochemists do. He isolated proteins, purified them, dehydrated them, formed them into crystals, pure crystals, put them between electrodes, no current flowed through them. They were insulators. Therefore, the idea that proteins are semiconductors was nonsense. Well, proteins are semiconductors, and there's ample evidence for that now. The living matrix includes various important structures in the body, tendons, ligaments, bones, cartilage, the superficial fascia right under the skin, the fascia, the myofascia around the muscles. So this is the bulk of the body. It is formed of collagen, which is a liquid crystal. And so if you look at muscle, the cross-section of muscle, is that a crystal? I mean, it's beautiful. Collagen is organized as a crystalline array, phospholipids and cell membranes. These are all liquid crystals. This is most of your body. Most of your body is a liquid crystal. You are walking, talking, breathing liquid crystals. 99% of the, this is from Dr. Pollack, 99% of the molecules, 70% maybe by weight, but if you count the molecules, 99% of them are water. And most of the water molecules are at surfaces. This is actin, filamentous actin. And the water molecules coat the surfaces of all the molecules molecules, all the elements of the cell. I ran out of dots. I got a little dotty out, little dots all around here, but you get the idea. Everywhere there is a layer or many layers of water. Most of the helices in the body are organized vertically. As I stand here, most of my molecules, the bulk of my molecular structure is vertical. And I think this is important. And if I can get all of the waters, which are also organized vertically, if I can get them all spinning at once, I think I can levitate. So here's collagen, and everywhere you look you find collagen mostly going up and down, not all of it, but mostly going up and down. The same with the actin and myosin in muscles, oriented mainly vertically. And these helical molecules are organizing water, as you know, and creating a massive number of spinning. So as you sit there, your water molecules are spinning. What that means exactly, we're not sure. Spin is a quantum phenomenon. It's one of those things that had to be invented to make the equations balance. Whether anything is actually spinning or not is still kind of an open question. So there you are with all your water molecules spinning, and they are precessing in response to the electromagnetic environment. This is the Larmor precession, named after Joseph Larmor, an Irish physicist and mathematician. When something is spinning, like an electron or a proton or a water molecule, it has an axis in its space. And in the presence of the field, the molecule or whatever it is will precess. The spin will be altered and sweep out a conical surface. And this is a well-established principle in physics. When the energy level in these crystals, liquid crystals, gets to a certain point, they begin to vibrate. And this is the work of Herbert Froelich. And this leads to the emission of coherent light, otherwise known as radiance. Both the fabric of space and the fabric of the body have spiral grains. Light spirals through space, energy spirals through molecules. Here is DNA and collagen. The spiral grain of the universe is very nicely described in 5 books by Vladimir Ginsburg. This is one of them, The Spiral Grain of the Universe. Profoundly important work, and one of his books describes the history of the spiral down through the ages. Highly recommended. What alerted me originally to something very exciting was the recognition by Berenson from the Netherlands on the basis of NMR studies that the collagen molecule, the spacing of the amino acids, is ideal for organizing water molecules adjacent to the molecules. So this spacing is perfect for ordering water. The collagen is a triple helix, and it has a hydration shell. Each molecule has a hydration shell around it, and the water molecules are spinning coherently, hopefully. That's the state of health. Someone told me, don't have them all spinning coherently. That might not be so good. Life is a matter of balance. Anyway, this arrangement accounts for the great sensitivity of living systems to external fields. Here's the summary of what I hypothesize. Here we have the collagen molecule. Here we have the highly ordered water molecules spinning and precessing. This is the fabric of space. This is one of the models of space. It's from Roger Penrose. It's called a spin network. And the idea is that there is a morphic resonance, a consciousness resonance from space through the water layer to the living system, and in the other direction. It goes in both directions. The hypothesis: normal physiology and health depend on quantum coherence in the water system, depend on this exchange between the organism and its environment, and vice versa. And the arrows, again, go in both directions, from us to the morphic field, and in the other direction as well. Spin is contagious. There's a very good, very readable book about this called Sync. It won a prize by Strogatz. How order emerges from chaos in the universe, nature, and daily life. Nice book. So here's lysine I use as an example of a molecule, and the water molecules associated with them. I don't have them oriented the way they should be. I have to work on that. And these water molecules, I suggest, couple the lysine or any other molecule or any part of the body with the morphic field and vice versa. So we have Larmor precession in response to environmental fields, sensitive down to a single quantum. There's no amount of energy less than that. The exchange is bidirectional. This is responsible for the non-thermal, non-ionizing effects of electromagnetic radiation. This is important because we have a growing number of people who are electromagnetically sensitive. And I believe, on the basis of what I've researched, that we are unbelievably sensitive to our electromagnetic environment, right down to the quantum level. Information storage. We've had a lot of discussion about the storage of information in water, and I suggest that we consider, and I think this fits with what a number of people have said, that the water doesn't really store information, that it conveys the information to the morphic field, and that it can get information back from the morphic field. So the water itself may not be the information stored. It's part of it's the exchange system. Energy storage, energy can be stored here, and these spins can generate torsion or spin waves that emerge from the body and go out into space and interact with the spin network, which is the fabric of space. And in a coherence domain, torsion waves can propagate from particle to particle and couple the spins. And this coherence occurs when many of these particles spin and precess together. Mei Wan Ho put together a very interesting model, and I highly recommend her organization, the Institute for Science and Society. Get her magazine. It is advertised as the only radical science magazine in the world, and it's a very valuable resource. And about this system, she said, energy and information input into any of the body's systems can spread over all systems. Conversely, energy and information from all systems can concentrate into any single system. Energy coupling is symmetrical, which is why we can have energy at will, whenever and wherever required. And this is from a wonderful article called Biology of Free Will. Look up the Biology of Free Will on Google, and it will take you to Mei Wan Ho's articles, which are brilliant. Coupling between different domains. Here's an example, the liver. There are different kinds of cells in the liver. Each cell type could be a specific domain with a particular spin. Capillary endothelial cells, parenchymal cells, and so on. And the cellular domains, the molecules within the cell, also can be particular domains of quantum coherence. This story that I'm telling you, my heroes who have led the way through this wonderful world are Emilio Del Tucci and Dr. Preparata, his colleague. Wonderful picture of them. Wonderful people. Mei Wan Ho at the water conference in London this spring. May 1 was amazing. And Herbert Froelich and Cyril Smith at Salford in England worked for 18 years. Their work is not widely known. They did amazing work, which is only gradually percolating into the consciousness of scientists. So these are my heroes. This exchange between molecules and the environment explains many things. For example, external homeopathy, where the remedy is in a sealed vial and you don't have to take it internally, you don't even have to touch it, and it has an effect. The effects of Qigong, Reiki, other kinds of energy therapies, and the effects of cell towers and Wi-Fi, and now the latest plague, smart meters that they want to put on your electrical meter. Dreadful things. And it helps us understand how some of these devices, therapeutic devices, work. They work by affecting the coherence in the water system. This is a different model. This is a quantum model. In the past, I've talked in classical physics, Newtonian physics, classical electromagnetism. Now we have to think in terms of quantum phenomena. And the electromagnetic environment also includes the fabric of space-time, torsion waves and the like. Yeah. So morphogenesis and consciousness. For a long time, we were told that as scientists, we were not supposed to be interested in consciousness. This was a philosophical issue best left to philosophers. And this changed dramatically when the thought leader, Sir Francis Crick, announced that consciousness arises from the operations of massively interconnected neurons in the brain and is therefore properly studied by neuroscience. And that got everybody excited, and neuroscientists started studying consciousness. And it was one of those tracks that happened, but I don't know how far it led. His astonishing hypothesis: a person's mental activities are entirely due to the behavior of nerve cells, glial cells, and the atoms, ions, and molecules that make them up and influence them. Well, that's one possible explanation. The neuron doctrine. The brain's neurons and synapses are components in a computer-like switching circuit. The brain equals the mind equals a computer. And a lot of people thought this way. It's a very simple idea. In other words, the brain is a soft computer. When you figure out what all the circuits are doing, you'll understand consciousness. Sounds good. Stuart Hameroff, with a few well-chosen words, essentially demolished this hypothesis. He said this: neurons are cells. Individual neurons are far more complex than simple switches, with enormous capacity for intracellular information processing. The neuron doctrine ignores the fact that neurons are living cells. A single-celled paramecium swims gracefully, avoids predators, finds food, mates, has sex, all without a single synapse. That tells us something. Sir Charles Sherrington, the great neuroscientist from the UK, said, of nerve there is no trace, but the cell framework, the cytoskeleton, might serve. Well, that's an interesting perspective also. Hameroff said, if the cytoskeleton can be so useful in protozoa, what might it be doing in the highly organized cytoskeleton of neurons? Are neurons stupid in comparison with protozoa? Good question. If you ask anybody, the man on the street, they'll tell you, where's your mind? Oh, there it is. Where's your memory? It's in there. Where's consciousness? It's in there. Where do you think? In there. What if all of these ideas are wrong? Oh dear. Well, Crick's neuron doctrine actually emerged from the research of John Eccles, who got the Nobel Prize in 1963 with Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley, who developed ideas about how the action potential was propagated in nerves. And in the Nobel Prize speech, the member of the Nobel Committee congratulated science for figuring out how nerves conduct and how thought and sensation are analyzed in the brain. And this Nobel Prize for these gentlemen would lead to an understanding of how the brain works. Didn't work out that way. Eccles' model was that the brain makes decisions and processes and integrates sensory information to produce the conscious moment, and this involves interactions between thousands of millions of nerves in the pyramidal cortex of the brain. And that started neuroscientists in a direction. 30 years later, after his Nobel Prize, Eccles took it back. He concluded that his famous model was inadequate to account for non-physical and transcendent properties of mind, feelings, thoughts, memories, intentions, emotions. We would have to go to a smaller level of scale, to the quantum properties, to locate the ultimate connection between mind and brain. I have a friend who was a neuroscientist present at the meeting where Eccles announced this, and the neuroscientists in the audience became rabid. They were horribly upset. I tried to represent this by rabid dogs. They were very upset because a couple of generations of neuroscientists had achieved their professorships, their academic tenure, publications, work on this model, which Eccles, or their father, was saying, move on, boys. So in his new book, Dr. Sheldrake points out that leading philosophers have generally agreed that memory and consciousness are not in the brain. And this is in his book and in his lectures that are on YouTube. Plotinus, memories reside in the soul. Bertrand Russell, there is a kind of causation that connects things across time. Wittgenstein, memory is not stored in the brain, period. Carl Jung, psyche is not in the head or the brain. Well, that's interesting. When Dr. Sheldrake's book, A New Science of Life, came out, it says that memory and morphology depend on morphic resonance, or resonance across time. And he's written some other books on this subject. Nature magazine said of this book is a good candidate for burning. That is an awful statement. I mean, just an absolutely dreadful thing for any magazine with any respectability to say. It's another example of the fact that science totally depends on new ideas. And scientists hate new ideas. They can't stand it. So this was a new idea, and it didn't go over very well at first. Einstein said, condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. So Nature magazine, in making that statement, was ignorant. He also said, if the idea isn't at first absurd, it doesn't stand a chance. Only absurd ideas evolve into new and important discoveries. So here's the essence. Morphogenetic fields give rise to all forms. Matter acquires form when it resonates with a field. The fields involved are not classical electromagnetic fields. This is where I stopped. I thought, wait a minute. Has he demonstrated that these fields he's talking about are not classical electromagnetic fields? So I set the whole thing aside for a while and came back, as you will see. Morphogenetic fields are derived from the body's own past actions and from the structures and actions of ancestors. What an incredible idea. A rabbit looks like a rabbit because during its development, it taps in to the history of all rabbits who have ever lived. It has behaviors that it has learned from its ancestors. What a fascinating fascinating idea. And I think he's right. Fields act across space and time. Well, as I said, I was skeptical because where's the evidence that these aren't just ordinary electromagnetic fields? And I found out about this. Konstantin Weil wrote a book on scalar waves. In fact, he developed the concept of scalar waves. And these are the kinds of waves that can provide a basis for the morphic field. Konstantin's book is available in German or English. And as you can see from the cover, he is concerned that scalar waves, which are the energies from which electromagnetic fields arise, may be more dangerous than standard electromagnetic fields in terms of cell phones. Niels Bohr and Schrödinger, fathers of quantum physics, agreed that quantum processes are at the interface between consciousness and matter. That's what we're talking about. And for a number of years, leading scholars from many different disciplines have developed an alternative model of consciousness and memory in which the properties of space play a key role. John Weltheim says, consciousness is the evolving intelligence of the universe. Universal consciousness is the sum total of all knowledge and accumulated intelligence. Dr. Sheldrake's analogy between memory and your TV. I can't look at your TV and see which programs you watched last night. They're not in there. They haven't left a trace. The brain may be like a TV, a receiver, that tunes into the memory channel, but the show is not stored there. So the brain has something to do with consciousness and memory, but not as much as we thought. Modern scholars are looking at this idea, looking outside the body for mechanisms of consciousness. And these are neuroscientists, philosophers, quantum physicists, cosmologists, cell biologists, astrophysicists, physicians. And here are some of them. Carl Pribram, David Bohm, Stuart Hameroff, Edgar Mitchell, an astronaut, Harumi Umezawa, a quantum physicist from Brazil, Deepak, Richard Amoroso, Irving Laszlo, Dennis Bicklewood, who invented holography. All of these gentlemen have contributed to this concept. Roger Penrose. And Rudy Shield, I'll tell you about him in a minute, and John Weltheim, who developed body talk. The morphic field extends throughout space and includes all objects, near and far. Here are models of the fabric of space. This is Roger Penrose spin network. This is from Milo Wolf. This is loop quantum gravity. This is sacred geometry, which I'll say more about. This is the Buddhist conception of Indra's web. And this is the Dirac sea. Different models of space. Milo Wolf, electron standing waves extend throughout space. Sacred geometry. This is where I have to take my clothes off. This is the part of my presentation where I get undressed. This is to wake you up. I know you're all asleep. There we go. And as a scientist, I'm not supposed to use words like sacred, so it's the geometry of the quantum vacuum. The reason we find these kinds of images in cultures all around the world, throughout the ages, is ancient peoples knew that this geometry was important. It did magic. And so they understood what we're talking about. Here's a statement, a very old statement about energy. This thing is the strongest of all powers, the force of all forces, for it overcometh every subtle thing and doth penetrate every elementary solid substances. This is from ancient writings, and I think gives an idea of how the ancients knew the power of this geometry. And it arises because it is the fabric of space and of energy and of information that surrounds and penetrates us. Empty space contains structure and energy and information. Mark Cummings wrote a brilliant article about this. He refers to the quantum vacuum as the quantum plenum. It's an absolute fullness. It's not a vacuum. It's the real source of energy for everything that happens in the universe. Molecular geometry induces a flux from the quantum plenum to life. It's an infinitely coherent field of luminosity. It's perfectly balanced, so we don't see it unless something happens that causes an imbalance that releases a lot of energy. Space is efflorescent with vacuum photons. It is the embedding space for electromagnetism and the source of the inner light of the spiritual traditions. Thank you, Mark Cummings. So, my hypothesis. Resonance takes place between the fabric of space, the models on the left, fabric of space, and the fabrics within the body, the ones on the right. Resonance. Never underestimate the power of resonance. Here's an example. This is Pioneer 10, sent into distant space to monitor the structure of the interstellar wind. On the 30th anniversary of its launch, NASA sent it a message. It was 7.4 billion miles away. It took 22 hours and 6 minutes to get a reply. The last very weak signal came in on 23 January 2003. It was 7.6 billion miles away, a 40-watt transmitter. Imagine being able to see a 40-watt light bulb that is 7.6 billion miles away. Well, think of that. Well, Albert Einstein had a colleague named Hans Tetrode, and Tetrode said, when I see light from a star 100 light years away, not only do I know that the light was emitted 100 years ago, before I was born, but also a group of atoms in the star knew that the light would enter my eye 100 years later, before I even existed. What a fantastic statement. Einstein said, I think, Hans, you're right. What could that be? Well, here's what I think it is. I think when the star emits a photon, it sends a pilot wave that travels instantaneously to its destination. And then the photon actually arrives much later. And it turns out that quantum physicists have thought about this. De Broglie talked about the guiding equation about pilot waves. And there's an equation. And this theory was revived by David Bohm in 1952. The pilot wave model, a version of quantum theory. Interesting. Well, a big light bulb went off for me when I met this gentleman, Rudy Schild. He is the chairman of the cosmology department at Harvard. He's the editor of the Journal of Cosmology, and he has a telescope in Arizona that is the largest telescope in the world that's devoted to looking at the emission spectra of distant stars and galaxies. These are the people who looked out there and saw things happening that made them realize there was too much matter and too much energy in the universe. Dr. Schild said, in a conversation we said, forget about dark energy and dark matter. Forget it. That's not what it is. It's consciousness. Really? After I picked myself up off the floor, I said, sir, do you and your colleagues speak this way in public? And he said, yes, we do. We do. In fact, we just published a special edition of the Journal of Cosmology, 2011, Consciousness in the Universe. It's like a phone book. It's a big, fat volume of astrophysicists, philosophers, neuroscientists, and so on, discussing about this process by which we interact consciously with the cosmos. And here's one of their ideas. This is totally fascinating. I mean, this is a hypothesis. It's out there. Because this is about black holes. They suggest that black holes serve as nature's hard drives, holding copies of the quantum holograms generated by each new moment of human experience, as well as each new event occurring in the non-living world. Everything is stored, all that information that Sheldrake is talking about in the morphic field is stored in these cosmic hard drives. An interesting idea. So the hypothesis that resonance takes place between the fabric of space and the fabric of organisms. Jean-Claude Combertot, a plastic surgeon in Bordeaux, France, has made some films using high-resolution video under the skin. And this is his technology. It's a cold laser with a high-definition video camera attached. And with permission from the patients, he puts this under the skin. He's made a film called Strolling Under the Skin. And this is the surface of the skin. It's woven into a framework of polyhedral structures. If you go under the skin, you find polyhedra, sacred geometry. This, I suggest, can resonate with the quantum vacuum. And these are different aspects of the network. Smaller fibers with larger ones throughout the body. The surface and the underlying matrix form a tensegrity structure. Well, I'll just tidy up here. If this interests you, there's a wonderful article, a lead article in Scientific American by Donald Ingber about tensegrity, the architecture of life, and what I'm suggesting, and others have suggested, is that this architecture can resonate with the fabric of space. And what determines form? That's what we're talking about. Yeah. So my hypotheses, normal physiology and health, depend on quantum coherence between and in systems in the body. Quantum coherence in water couples living systems to the entangled fabric of the universe, the morphic field. Quantum coherence enables easy water to be extremely sensitive to fields in the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And I think I'm sure we have thousands of questions. The time is we're quite late already. So what about, again, having two very brief short questions and then leave them on in the break. So we have two questions. Jerry, please go ahead.
At a recent meeting about a week ago, someone mentioned that MRI studies showing that people with perfectly functioning brains had only roughly 10% of the brain tissue present, the rest was water. And these people were equally intelligent as all the people in this meeting. And it seems to me that that kind of observation is in support of all the theses that you were presenting. So just a brief comment. There's lots of water there, and but not much neural tissue.
Exactly. There's an old article called "Is the Brain Really Necessary?" in which in Britain, they looked at people with hydrocephaly, and there was one guy who was a graduate student, a musician. His brain tissue was the size of a pea, pushed up against one side of the inside of his cranium. In Oriental medicine, the Chinese thought the brain was the mystery organ. Maybe it still is.
I have a question. You talked about the quantum coherence, and you make some model with spin, and then you made a link with like a Reiki or healing, and there's a big question. So if you're gonna explain like that way, then whenever there is a healing or Reiki or whatever, we have to be able to measure the magnetic field. But in the moment when somebody heals or does something, some esoteric energy work, it cannot move even the small compass. So we either we have to give up this coherence model because it doesn't cause any magnetic field, external magnetic field, or we have to repair the quantum mechanics and then say that there is any extra magnetic field, so which we cannot measure with a magnet. How do you think about that?
I've always looked at the body in terms of classical electromagnetism. Magnetic fields affect the movements of charged particles. This is Ampere's law, the laws of physics, Faraday's law of induction. When you bring your hand near another person, you can induce the current flows in their bodies. And this is classical physics, classical electromagnetism. And what I'm saying is there's a whole new world of understanding and of medicine lying before us as we take the discoveries of quantum physics and the discoveries of water, the things going on in water. And I suggest that water is the ultimate quantum interface between the electromagnetic environment and life. So that's an idea to think about for the future. And all of the work of the brilliant people here is going to pay off, I'm suggesting, and really help us with health and well-being.
Let us once again thank James